Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's My Games Recruitment Show, where, as you can see, we're talking about how to get more emails read and avoid ending up in the dreaded spam folder. So to do that, I have a very special co-host today, which is the one and only Pete Ames instead of Mike. Hi, Pete.
Hi, Kirsty. Delighted to be here. Second time in a row.
I know. Mike has landed on his way back from Egypt. He's currently in the car on the way home, but didn't get back in time to do today's show, which is why Pete is here. But I'm sure next time you see Mike, he'll be full of all stories of one of his favourite points in history. So, Pete, today's show we're really excited about, aren't we?
I am really excited about this. Yes, it's obviously about email, and it's such a big part of recruitment. Shouldn't be the only part, but it's such a big part. And we've actually got a really awesome guest. We're welcoming back Nick Butcher.
We are. Hi, Nick.
Hi, Nick.
Hello.
Back. So Nick is here because for the last 6 years, Nick has been running his own business, Email Nerd, and that should give you a bit of a clue about how this man loves email. If there's anything Nick doesn't know about email, it's not worth knowing. And obviously a lot has changed, and that's why we're here today.
How's that for an intro, Nick?
That's pretty good. I'm quite impressed with that.
Okay, now as usual, guys, as we go through, Nick is here. He's our expert for the day. So if you have any questions, queries, anything like that, please put them in the comments, and I will bring them up to Nick. But Nick, Pete alluded to it there. We had you on the show about 2 years ago to talk about emails.
Yeah.
Can you explain to us kind of what is different now? What has changed so much that we've got you kind of back on the show? Because you're not talking about the same things.
No. So things have changed, and it's effectively the mail providers have got a lot stricter in what they are classifying good email versus spam. So to a certain extent, spam is subjective. When you talk about spam, it's a bit of a subjective sort of subject. What I might think is spam, you might think is really useful. But in terms of the mailbox providers, it's effectively what they're trying to do is protect their users from unwanted email. That's the way that they see it. So they've been raging this war for ever and ever, and it's effectively where I come in terms of trying to navigate through some of that. But 2 years ago, we were talking a lot about what I would say is the trust of an email. So making sure that it's configured correctly to get through data. So that's what we were talking about, and that's what it mainly was about. Now it's all changed because what's come along is AI, and a lot of the mailbox providers are now got a whole host of data which they're squirting at AI, which then effectively means they can determine whether an email is going to be valuable or not valuable to that user. And so that has made a huge impact in whether emails now get classified as junk. But it gets worse because if all of your emails are classified as junk, it's effectively almost an on-off switch. So it means that whatever email you sent, whether it's an actual sort of legitimate email of sending a client a contract or even speaking to a candidate, that will also go into the junk folder regardless of whether that was deemed to be, and content was deemed to be junk or not. So it has got a lot stricter, which is why we're here again.
Ooh, okay. But it's not, we are going to help with that. We have got things to help with that. But Pete, do you have anything to say on what Nick just shared?
Yeah, I think it's something that there's been a lot of noise in it in the industry, but the interesting thing about email, and Nick, when you came on a couple of years ago to talk about that trust component, I think it's worth reiterating exactly what that covers, right? But the amount of technical configuration and stuff that's going on in the background is actually quite complex, isn't it? The space between your email leaving your server, your inbox, your outbox, and it's trying to get into the inbox of your target. There's a lot going on there, and I think, as you said, it's changed a bit, but it's still fundamentally the same. It's just more complex now, more advanced. Let's talk about that for a second. I think let's get clear, because that'll be stuff that some people do know, and then we can talk about the things that people perhaps don't know.
Yeah. So just for everybody listening, if you missed Nick's last show, this is a very quick run through of what we spoke about. But the main thing here is trust, Nick, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. So quick one about email. Email has not changed in the millions of years since it's been around. So email was invented in the 80s, and fundamentally, at the very back end of it, the technical bit, nothing has ever changed on that. It's the way that it's sent hasn't really changed at all. Obviously, what has changed over the years is how we use email. And so the very first job, actually, 30 odd years ago, and this is really showing my IT age, was to install email onto desktop of, that I worked for. Loads of people at the time were like, why do I need this email? I don't need to have email. Fast forward to now, and we can't do business without email. Email is one of those essential communication tools. So what's changed in terms of email is not necessarily the technical elements, but how we use it. And as a result, that use has opened up to abuse that use in terms of it's an open standard, and that's sort of what email is all about. So long as I have an email address, I can send an email. In the same way that as long as I have an address, I can send a postal letter to somebody. It's an open system, so it's designed that way. It's that's sort of how it's grown to a certain extent in terms of usage. So when we're sending an email as an open system, and as the systems behind it are ancient, 50 odd years old in terms of the technology that's driving it, a lot of the mailbox providers have to put some protection around their users in terms of making sure that A, they don't get malicious emails, which is obviously the number one protection piece that they're sort of protecting users against, but two, inboxes don't get full of emails that aren't valuable. I think that's the best way of putting it. So they are trying to give value to an email, and that value is effectively driven by whoever's inbox it is. If they think that something is valuable, then the mailbox provider will deem that as valuable. So it's very subjective. Ultimately, that's where we are. So it's sort of email is sent. The technology behind it hasn't changed at all, and then it has arrives. Now, that protection piece that I talked about means that you have to put certain technical pieces in place on the trust layer that we talk about. I'm sort of characterizing it as trust, but it's actually a whole bunch of technical standards, things like SPK, DMARC, MTA. There's a whole host. I'm not going to get into the technical bits because this is when sort of it goes over people's heads and they don't care. Ultimately, it's about putting that trust piece in place, because if you don't have that configuration right, the mailbox providers will think that you are sending untrusted email and automatically just put it into the junk folder, or worse still, not even deliver it. So you've got to get that bit right, and that hasn't changed. That was what we expected years ago. That's still very much that very first piece that you need to have in place. You need to have that trust piece in place. And what that does is actually tells the mailbox provider that your email can be trusted over the millions of others that necessarily have that trust layer in place. So that's fundamental. The good news is that a lot of people have elements of that in place by default, because if you use Google or if you use Microsoft or any other mailbox provider, generally speaking, those are put in place sort of early on. But what happens is that not all of them are implemented. In fact, it's a well-known fact that about 80% of the implementation piece is never completed. So there are millions of users out there that never complete the trust layer properly to be able to be fully trusted. So trust is an important factor, and it's one that needs to be there.
Yeah, Nick, in my head, I've almost got an analogy, and I'm a simple man in many ways. Some would say very simple. Someone is sat right with us right now who would say that. I'm almost creating an analogy in my head. This trust component is almost like I've sent a letter by courier, and before the courier's allowed in the building, they've got to just say, well, it came from Pete. This is his company. This is his reputation in the wider space. Am I allowed in the building? It's not about what's in the letter. It's about my reputation, and that reputation is essentially credentials attached to every email I send. Is that roughly what we're talking about here? And if I haven't set those credentials up right, I'm not allowed in.
Yeah, the way, pretty much, the way I explain it is, back in King Henry VIII's day, he used to send a letter to somebody, and he used to put a wax seal on it, and that wax seal meant that he had signed it, and it come from him, because the seal was, King Henry VIII seal, or whoever it was, important. That was then handed to a courier. The courier then took it to whoever it was, and the person receiving that knew that if that wax seal was in place and it was the right seal emblem, that had come from King Henry VIII or whatever. So effectively it's the same thing. We now, the trust layer and the email standards effectively put that effectively a digital seal on an email, so that when it arrives, it could be saying, yes, it's come from where it's been sent from, and it's it hasn't been touched intact. The other way of looking at this as well is that fundamentally, when you send an email, it's a bit like sending a postcard. Remember when we used to send postcards? We used to scroll on the back, and then the postman used to have a good read on the back. Joe Bloggs is having a nice holiday in wherever. A postcard can be read by anybody along that postal system, obviously. If we put it in an envelope and seal that envelope, then the postman can't read it, or anybody else can't read it. So that's really what we're doing when we're sort of wrapping our email in something that protects it, but also stops it being read, but also then says where it's coming from. So yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I understand that now. So, as you said, that hasn't fundamentally changed. The way some of that information is read at the door of the office building, as it were, it has evolved with time. But I think the real key thing to get across is it's not about what's inside the letter. This is before that comes into play. This isn't about spam configuration stuff. But that does lead us, I think, nicely on to the next part, which I think you said was reputation. So what's the reputation of you as a sender, and what's in the email? And these are where people perhaps think more about that kind of spam filtering. So this is where I think you've told us things have changed.
Yeah. So it's the way to look at it in terms of sort of the trust, reputation, and all the other elements is that things have evolved. So trust is pretty much the same as where it is. It's got a lot stricter. So you now need to apply more of the standards just to make sure that everything is working. The same with reputation to a certain extent. It's just evolving as technology evolves for the mailbox provider. So we all used to know spam words and all these sorts of things that we have to avoid in terms of the content. Generally speaking, so long as you wrote a sort of a non-spammy sort of engaging email, it would get through to the inbox and everything would be okay. What's changed is that actually the mailbox providers have got a lot smarter in how they determine what your reputation is. So before, what used to happen was the email used to arrive, they used to look at it and go, yeah, it looks a little bit spammy, so we'll put it to the junk folder. Now what happens is they go, there's an email, but okay, what happened with the 20 other emails that person sent before? Because now they've got all this data that they can very quickly call them. And that's the sort of fundamental evolved change that's happened, is that it used to just be sort of like your email arrives and point in time whether it's going to go into the inbox or the junk folder. There were a few sort of lists and things that if you got yourself on would circumvent that, but ultimately that's what happened. Now what happens is that your email arrives, it's like, well, okay, what happened to send before? What was the engagement rate like before? What happened to this particular email sender on previous occasions? Not only that, but then they take a step back and look at all of the emails sent, and they go, well, actually, okay, this person might have sent several thousand in the last couple of days, and 30% of them bounced, and we've had 20% of people say that these are spam. So actually, now we're going to start, actually this is not valuable, so we're going to put it into the spam folder. So that reputation piece has just evolved to the extent now that historical data is being dragged into that decision making.
That's so interesting. So if you're a recruiter and you're sending kind of marketing emails to try and selling candidates or to try and job hunt, that kind of stuff that a lot of us have done that's worked in the past. Now, if you do that, it actually could be damaging your reputation and making it more difficult for you later on.
Yes. So the used to happen typically, especially in the recruitment industry more than anything else, is that it used to just be a numbers game. If you sent enough emails, eventually you'd get enough people reply and click on it, and whatever it is, you'd get that engagement that you needed. And the more engagement you needed, you just ramped up the number of emails. So you would be sending thousands, then you'd be sending tens of thousands, then 100,000, then 1 million, and you just keep sending them, and it just used to be a sort of this revolving circle. Now, if you do the same practices very, very quickly, all of your email will just end up in the junk folder, and you can't do that, can't change it. There's no hack that can get around it. You're just there. So yes, changes have to be made in terms of the way that you are sending email. And that actually is quite difficult for a lot of people, not just recruiters, but just generally across the board of people that send any sort of outreach email. I think especially so for recruiters, because it's always been a very reactionary industry in terms of, we now need to suddenly get some clients, or we now need to suddenly get some candidates. So, we'll just turn the machine on, turn it off type thing. You can't do that anymore. It's got to be a lot more stable and a lot more steady and a lot more, how I say it, quality, I suppose.
So if I can, again, what I kind of heard, this is the business analyst in the translating between a techie and business. Back in the day, it was just, are there spam words in the email? Is there mention of pills, or is there mention of free and those kind of things? And as long as you weren't on a blacklist, it was just every email was treated fresh and new. Then we had, the ability to report spam, these email providers, because this is Microsoft and Google. It's not individual companies maintaining the track record. It's the big players. Then it started to just track, are they getting marked as spam? Very things that feedback, but a lot of people didn't. And then it started saying, well, do people just delete it straight away? Do people do things with it, file it away, put filters in? As it got smarter, it was able to take more and more feedback from the behavior of people, if I've heard you right here. And, its ultimate job is stop putting things in people's email inbox that they don't want to see. There's lots of different tricks that they can pick up for that. And it's evolved to the point now where it's almost unavoidable. And I guess my initial question was, I think most people I've worked with in recruitment know about, the spam proofreaders. Put this email through the spam reader before we send it. Are those things still of value, or have we moved so far beyond them that it's almost trying to, plug a river with a cork type thing?
That's a difficult question to answer, actually, because there isn't a straight answer to that. Yes, to a certain extent, we have gone way beyond that, but in other respects, it's still taken into account. So if you send a really spam-riddled email, spam word-riddled email, it's the junk folder. But ultimately, the way I think about all of this is that what's tended to happen, and I think it's evolved in the right way to a certain extent, is that the spam word list was getting greater and greater and greater. You then couldn't do this, you couldn't do that, you couldn't do this. The list was, ever growing in terms of what you could and couldn't do to get an email delivered, and it's getting quite complex. Yet, on the other side, if it wasn't an outreach email, so if it wasn't a cold outreach email and it was just we were just sending a business conversational operational email, we could send links, we could send this, we could send spamming words, we could send free, and it would all be fine. So the difference now is that engagement piece sort of trumps anything else. So that piece in terms of what's your reputation before is really, really key to and trumps anything else that's gone before it. So that is still there.
It's still necessary not to be, filling it with numbers, but where previously I would never send something with the word free in it, if I've got a good reputation and I'm sending it to people who kind of have opened it before, I can quite easily put free webinar in, and my reputation will carry me past the spam filters. So proofread is still valuable to make sure you're not going too far, still necessary, but nowhere near enough anymore to really circumvent this. We need something more.
Yeah, I think it's worth talking about here as well. What we're talking about tends to be relating to outreach emails, so sales, marketing type emails, because there are 3 different types of emails. We just talked about it, sort of the business operational conversations, your main mailbox, if you like. It's you sending me an email, I reply. It's that, backwards and forwards. It's clients, it's candidates, it's whatever it is, suppliers. It's those conversations that we have in order to conduct business. Generally speaking, if you just sent those, you wouldn't have a problem with going in the spam folder at all, because they're usually high engagement. They're usually emails that have fairly good reputation in terms of they're sent from a trusted platform, all of that stuff. They're generally classed as good emails in terms of that good versus bad type thing. Then you have the next sort of section of email is called transactional emails, and they're one-way emails. So that's things like notifications, alerts, invoices, receipts, anything that you get that doesn't require you to sort of respond in terms of clicking anything, or it's just one way, and that you can usually tell them because it's no reply. Those sorts of emails get a bit of a free pass to a certain extent. They're not counted in spam because they've got a purpose. They serve a purpose, and so long as that purpose is sort of fairly clear, they sort of get a free pass. They're not sort of covered by any of this. So if you sent just those sort of 2 types of email, it wouldn't be a problem. The problem comes when you send outreach email, or especially cold outreach email, but it can also be newsletter, is that if you send more of that, and if your reputation is such, the engagement is low, as in, people don't value your emails, they don't open them, as you said, delete them without being read, all those negative actions, then that effectively tips the scale for all of your email. So I think it's quite important that we look at those different types of distinction, that generally speaking, the first 2 won't sort of land you in any sort of trouble. It's when you introduce that outreach piece that is generally causing it. And for recruiters, that actually happens a lot.
Big part, both for sales and for candidates. So it's almost
exactly,
a double value that you're making it. And of course, there's always a huge chunk of people that aren't interested in it because of the timing. Even if you get it really super bang on, not just spam proof, but incredibly convincing, if they don't need to hire, or if they're not considering a move, which is most people, you're going to end up with a lot of people ignoring, deleting your emails, which is then going to get the reputation.
Is there a way, Nick, of determining your reputation? Is it something that you just kind of guess at and think, in the last 3 years I've been spending a lot of those emails, or is there something I can do to determine if my reputation is great or not so great?
No, there's no easy way of doing this. So there are various tools that you can get, checking tools and various other things, but they only really can get access to a certain amount of data. So what mailbox providers keep this information to themselves. They do share it with some certain sort of trusted suppliers and various things, but ultimately this information is kept to themselves. The first you really know about this is when you have a conversation with somebody and they go, oh, well, your email was in the junk folder, and then you have another conversation and go, oh, your email was in the junk folder. There's no real way of determining this, unfortunately. It would be good if there was.
I was going to say, it would be great if you said yes, Nick. I think you would have been making millions, but that's okay. That's okay. But in a second, we are going to talk about things, the next kind of pillar that you spoke about, which is how you can kind of improve your reputation, or the things that you can do to make it better. But before then, Nick, we have a sponsored message. Now, this is a very unique sponsored message, Pete, and it's one very close to our heart, and it's one that we don't do very often.
That's right. Normally we talk about a service or a platform we think could be really handy for you as a recruiter, but This week, we are just going to do it a little different. I want to talk to you about my wife, Jo Kelly. And to understand why, I'm just going to take you back. It's going to take a couple of minutes. Just want to take you back 13 years to the year 2012. It's the Summer Olympics, and Britain is dominating the track cycling. And I'm watching all of this from the discomfort of a hospital chair in Manchester next to my wife's bed, because she's in the middle of a bone marrow transplant. And just a couple of years earlier, when we got married, we didn't think we'd get to that stage. We didn't think she had long at all, because she'd been given a terminal diagnosis for cancer. But she never stopped fighting. And, you know, I think recruiters can all admire that. It's you never stop, keep going. And as long as you keep going, things will come good. And they did. So she got herself into a position where a transplant was actually an option. But then a new fight began, which was to find a donor, somebody who could give her the stem cells necessary to fight the cancer on her behalf. Thankfully, Anthony Nolan came riding in to save us in the nick of time and found us a donor with their register. And now, 13 years on, Jo is still here. We've got two amazing little children, and she's developed in those 13 years 2 big passions. Number one is the bike. Watching that track event really got into her subconscious, because the first thing she wanted after she got better was a bike. And from there, she's gone from strength to strength. Never cycled before that day. She's now competed in a 24-hour team endurance event on the track. She's finished 100-mile races, and she competed at the British Transplant Games in the women's cycle race, and she's won 2 years on the trot. She has become a beast, to be quite frank, on the bike. But her second passion, and the more important passion, is she's a huge advocate for getting people to register as potential donors, because the sad thing is, in the UK, there are still people who have fought really hard to get into a position where a donor transplant is possible, but there's no donor. And this is harder for certain pots of people than others. So she's desperately trying to raise awareness, and it's her mission, really, to get as many people registered as she can. And now here's where you come in, because Jo is going to be combining both passions. She's competing at the World Transplant Games with the GB team, and she plans to use that platform to raise even more awareness about donation. And there are 3 things that you could do to help if you are up for it. Number one, if you can, because the Transplant Games are in Dresden this year in Germany, and it's a bit expensive to get there. It's all self-funded. So she has a crowdfunding running to help us make that happen, get her there so she can create this platform. If you do feel you can make a donation, it would be incredibly appreciated. The link is on the page right now. And if you're listening back to this or watching it on YouTube or Spotify, then we'll put the link in the description. Now, the other question is, if you are part of a larger firm and perhaps you have a corporate CSR policy, then Jo would be really interested if you would like to speak with her. Jo is a wonderful speaker. She's been on the BBC twice. She's gone into schools. She's done talks. And she really wants to, if possible, get some sponsorship, but more than that, get access to rooms of individuals, especially young, healthy individuals, which recruitment is full of, to try and inspire some of them to sign up onto the appropriate register, which is the third thing we'd like to ask. If you can't do any of the above, or even if you can, it would be fantastic if you could register for yourself. There is a site, DKMS, which is an organization. They have places in the US, Germany, the UK, Africa, various other countries, and they maintain a register, and they will take donors up to the age of 55, I think. And if you are up for it, it's a simple swab. They send it through in the post, you send it back. And then if ever you come up, it's as easy as donating blood. Easier, I think, in some ways. So please do consider registering yourself and encouraging others as well. So if you do sign up and you do get called for, you will save a life. And honestly, I cannot describe the impact that Jo's donor has had for us. Now, as we said, it was slightly different. So we tried to figure out how to seg you back into email from this. And the best we could come up with is, Kirsty, should we get back into email?
Yes, I think that's probably for the best. We are incredibly proud of Jo. And like Pete said, even if you can't give any money, just awareness of it is enough. So thank you very much for that, Pete. And good luck to Jo. We'll give you updates as to when those games happen as well. So, Nick, let's move back into the world of email. Just kind of get back in the zone. And we want to talk now about what we can do to improve our reputation, or to to make it so that we're not penalized, I suppose. And you call this engagement. This is the final kind of thing to talk about. Can you explain to us what we can do to help ourselves?
Yes. So what I've been talking about in all of this is effectively mailbox providers determining value to your email. So whatever email is sent, whatever the content is, the value that is put on that email is there we're trying to get to a point to understand. So it sort of all changes when you start to think a little bit more about email being a conversational tool and not a megaphone. So the point of outreach in the first place, whether that's client or candidate, is to find a new client or candidate. So normally, if we were to meet somebody in the street, we would say hello, and then we wouldn't launch into this massive long email or massive conversation about this, that, and the other. We would naturally have a conversation about whatever it is that we were sort of had in common, but generally speaking, we would have a conversation about them either being a client or them being a candidate. So this is effectively the change that we need to make, is that we need to start having conversations within email. Now, the reason being is when we start thinking about it like that, it changes how we send the email, and therefore the engagement within that email increases. So what we want to do is we want to send emails that by and large increase our engagement. Now, engagement is positive actions such as opening, reading, replying, clicking, moving away from spam. It's that general sort of the user doing something with that email, forwarding it, replying to it. Generally that engagement piece. What we need to do is send emails that sort of effectively allow us to be able to have engagement in there. So that means potentially that we're not going to be sending thousands of automated emails that don't have any particular value. We're going to be sending emails that invoke a conversation and so a little bit more personalized. This is a bit of a scary concept to go from when you're very used to sending thousands of emails to suddenly, hang on a minute, we're going to be sending a very different outreach approach. But effectively, that's where we need to get to because of that reputational piece and all that data that the mailbox providers now have. We have no other option whether to change to this new method of sending emails. And really, it's that the key thing in all of this is that email is conversation. Email is a conversation tool. We use it to send back and forward. So if we're sending emails out, we're sending them back. So the way to think about this is actually to change the call to action email. So normally we send an outreach email and it has, click here or do this or do that, or sometimes a reply, but generally speaking, it's an actionable item within the email that needed to do, and it's normally a click. Way that we change that, we need a reply back. That reply back can be one letter or one word, it can be a whole sentence, it can be a conversation. It doesn't really matter too much because that reply back actually does quite a lot. So what that does is it tells the mail providers that email was valuable because they've opened it, read it and replied to it, so it's got to be valuable. It allows you to have email conversation backwards and forwards. So there are some fundamental changes that often have to make to how you send it in the first place to be able to have that conversation. But generally speaking, you can have that conversation over email. But also having that conversation then also further enforces that email was indeed valuable. So that then increases your reputation with the mail provider. So it's all about how we change how we actually want the person to interact, if that makes sense.
So if I can simplify, I'm going to come up with a simple version of what I think you just told me, Nick. Nobody do this. I don't think it's the advice that Nick's giving, nor my advice. If I were used to approach candidates and I used to send an email with a link to a job ad, it's like, if you like the sound of this, click here and you'll get more details. I no longer send that, is what we're saying. Is instead I send the email, this is the job. If you're interested, just reply with yes, and I'll let you know. And if I wanted to get real fancy, I'd actually set it up so that anybody that replied with yes, I sent a reply back saying, can I just check? This is the banding. This is the other bit of information. Are you still interested? I'm trying to encourage more conversation. And then I would send an email with the link to the job where they could fill out the details. So I'm looking to create more back and forth at the cost, perhaps, one or two link clicks, because the back and forth is so much more powerful and effective.
Yes. It doesn't have, we're talking about increasing your reputation, increasing that engagement, and we're swinging it in your favor. So typically you want to be sending your emails to get at least 20% engagement. So we're not talking about every email you send is going to be some sort of engagement, because that doesn't happen naturally. The way to look at this is, how do we naturally send emails when we're talking about sort of business and everything else? We email, sometimes we don't reply back to them, and whatever. It's a very similar sort of process in terms of when we want to have that engagement within our emails, is that we want to get that sort of level of engagement from whoever we're sending to, so that at least reading it and engaging positively. So yes, it's that whole piece.
So that sounds quite complicated to do. I kind of get your point you were making now, that it sounds scary, because it's very different to kind of persuasive, exciting, dangle a carrot, click here, that feels more narrow. It feels a lot harder to persuade someone on an outreach kind of email to come back. What do we do here? Because I've heard in the past, and I don't know if this is still relevant, that some people would segment the types of emails. So very early stage emails would go from a particular email server, even domain. Anybody that responded would be graduated to another, and then that one had a better domain because it tended to talk to people. And then there'd be an even alpha, which is where you put the really special people you could trust. And you almost had good, not great domains, and you move people back and forth. Is that an aspect of what we're talking about here, or is the main change really all about how and what we say in the emails?
Actually, you've just hit the nail on the head. That is the sort of the second piece of engagement, is that what we want to be able to send that email to a list of people that we know will engage, or we feel will more engage. So that list that you have does have to be segmented down into those stages almost. So somebody new on the list will get a different approach and a different email to somebody that's been on the list a while. Recruitment has these many complexities to it, in that there is I want to find a client, in terms of trying to find new clients, or I have a job, or I have a candidate. But also there's this long-term piece, because in all of that, often, nobody's moving, or it's not the right time for hiring, all of that sort of thing. So it's keeping people on the back burner as well. So the whole element of what do we do longer term, which is a slightly different strategy to what we're doing shorter term. But ultimately, what we'll be doing is segmenting all of that down and being very, very specific on the type of person that we want to attract in all of those. Yeah. So I think from a candidate point of view.
Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, so I was going to say, from a candidate view, we get specific, because we know we need a particular type of candidate to fill a particular type of role. We need to apply almost that same element to the client side, in terms of, and it's the same old adage of that marketing persona. Everybody talks about a marketing persona, but actually you need to get really, really strict on that, because we want to be sending only to our personas that we've got in place for whatever we want to, in terms of clients. So it's making sure that our list matches our persona, because then our language and naturally how we're talking to that client or that candidate is all based on that persona. So therefore we're sending fewer emails, because we're not doing the spray and hope type of approach. We're sending very targeted email to our persona, which has more of a valuable message in it, which will then hopefully get more engagement into that back. So it's a different,
which is
it's a different approach.
Big thing we believe in this as well. Nick, I'm conscious of time. There's one question I wanted to ask you, because I think that's given some direction. But there's another question you touched on. We need to write emails that create engagement, and you mentioned things like open, reply, and click. Now, there is something I just want to quickly bring out. Click-through rates and open rates have grown much less valuable as a metric for tracking your emails. Could we just very quickly talk about what that means?
Yes. So everybody used to, and still the case to an extent, everybody used to measure a success of a campaign-based outreach on open rates and click-through rates. So open rate is where the email has been opened, and that's counted as a counter. The click-through is the same sort of thing. It's somebody's on a link, and that's counted. The mechanism for doing that means that there are elements in an email that effectively drive all of those counters, if you like. Google, Yahoo, Microsoft will follow, and potentially Apple will follow in terms of mailbox providers have actually said that they don't want those in emails anymore. It's actually in their policy. So all the mailbox providers have policy which they say they measure against, and it's publicly available, has been for years. That it's called hidden elements. Those hidden elements are now effectively acted upon. So actually, if you are counting through rates, I would urge you to stop straight away. Don't even include them. Secondly, which is more to your point, is that the open rates have been skewed of late. So probably the last couple of years, open rates have been a bit of a skewed. And that's because as email providers have got better technology in front of the email arrive, actually opening the email in a sort of a dummy way to check it. And so that's effectively like a bot opening it just to see if it's actually what it's supposed to be before they deliver it. So open rates have been very skewed for a long time. And actually even the sort of clients, Outlook and various other Google clients, when you clicking on an email, that counts as an open. It gets very skewed very quickly. We now don't open, or we don't count open rates in terms of success. What we're actually looking for in terms of KPI is the actual reply back, that engagement piece. We also now need to make sure. Sorry.
Click-throughs also fall into that same issue. There are more and more machines on a link to see what happens now. I think if you want to get really coordinated, you can track landing rates on pages where something hangs around for more than half a second to kind of get a bit of a true feel for click-through rates. But you're looking now outside of the email. These two are quite misleading. Would you use them at all? Do you think there's any value in them, or would you recommend people? I mean, you've already said open rates, just stop. Same for click-through rates. They're not.
Okay.
Yeah. No. Stop using them completely.
I like a definitive statement to end on. And we have unfortunately come to that time of the show where we have to end. Now, in a second, as usual, Nick is going to give us the top tips. So anybody who's watching thinking, I need to sort my email out, we're going to go to Nick with that. But before then, let me explain who we've got next week. We have Mitch Sullivan coming on, who's an excellent guest, and he's coming on. He's an excellent copywriter, and he's coming on to talk to us about how you can get more of your audience's attention. Whether you're writing CVs, job adverts, LinkedIn posts, when you compare it now to all of this stuff, and I use that word specifically coming from AI, being able to stand above and to write good copy that your audience is going to be interested and engage with, following today's theme, is going to be ever more important. So, sorry, my dog. So Mitch Sullivan is going to be on next week's show. So, Nick, before we finish, can you tell us what your top tip is, please?
Sorry, my internet broke up then, but I think you sort of said the last piece. Yes. So the top tip for me is actually more a mind piece, and that is remembering email is a conversation tool. If you remember that email is a conversation, and that's the conversation we have, and it's not sort of using a megaphone approach, we're not just sort of shouting out and hopefully somebody will answer back. We're actually want to use it as a conversation. So every email you send, if you think I want to have a conversation with a person that I'm sending this to, mind shift is quite phenomenal. So that is my top tip. If you just did that alone, that would ultimately change your reputation and your engagement pretty quickly.
Okay, I like that. I like that. It's a good tip that we can all implement. So thank you very much. So it comes to me at the end of the show now to say thank you very much. Thank you to everybody who's been watching today or listening if you're on Spotify. Thank you very much for Nick. You've been absolutely an amazing guest today. You've given me much more understanding of email considering it was zero before. So thank you very much for coming, Nick.
You're very welcome, and I can talk email for hours and hours. So
it's been a good day for you as well. And of course, I want to say thank you to Pete for just being here. Really,
just that's all I really need to do to make things better. Just be
supporting
there.
me on my show. That's what it is. Right. So as I mentioned, guys, Mike is back in 2 weeks, and we will see you then.